Well, good evening and welcome to Africa Research Institute. Thank you all very much indeed for coming to this discussion about tax administration and collection in Africa. We first got interested in this topic, probably like many others, when the 2010 Africa Economic Outlook was published, where the special theme was domestic resource mobilization in Africa. And we came back here after that and said, well, what we would really like to find is a revenue authority doing something very interesting, in many ways new, with whom to collaborate and produce a publication about that was a sort of case study of developments regarding taxation, maximisation of domestic revenues in Africa. Now, little did we know that at much the same time as that report was published by the OECD and the African Development Bank, some very radical changes were underway as far as tax collection and administration in Burundi were concerned. In 2010, the Office Burundais des Recettes had been founded as a semi-autonomous revenue authority. Well, 3 years on, I'll cut the in-between bit, but 3 years on, we're very fortunate at Africa Research Institute to be able to collaborate with the OBR to produce a publication about their experiences over the past 3 to 4 years. It is, in a way, a case study, but many of the problems that they have come up against and many of the measures that they have implemented and sought to implement are of very wide relevance, right across the continent and indeed throughout the so-called developing world. So for us, what was happening in Burundi could not have been more interesting, because here was a radical shake-up of a tax authority occurring against a backdrop which could not have been more hostile in a sense. In 2008, Burundi's GDP per capita was the lowest in the world. 2009, emerging from many years of a terrible civil war, it was not perhaps the most obvious candidate for where a very progressive approach was being taken, with support, it has to be said, from the highest level, a new approach to tax administration. And on that note, I'd like to give a particular welcome to our 3 delegates from the OBR. Kieran Holmes is the Commissioner General, well known to a number of you in the audience, and he has been maybe 3 decades working with tax authorities in Africa, so we are extremely fortunate to have him with us tonight to participate in this discussion. Also equally fortunate to be welcoming Domitien Dihokubwayo, who is the Deputy Commissioner General of the OBR and also the Commissioner for Customs and Excise, and Chantal Ruvakubuza, who is the Commissioner for Domestic Taxes. Encore une fois, c'est un grand honneur à vous souhaiter à Africa Research Institute et Londres aussi. Merci, merci, merci. Getting them all together has been quite a feat. Domitien has come from almost direct from Burundi, is only here for just over 48 hours. Chantal is on her way back from World Bank meetings in Washington. Kieran is on his way to the Harvard Kennedy School and Irish Tax Institute conference on global tax policy tomorrow. And I'm very pleased to say that their publication, our joint collaboration, is being made available to all the delegates at that conference in Dublin. It takes a considerable amount of time on the part of the practitioners, the important people, to collaborate in producing one of our policy voices. And we are extremely grateful that all 3 of them gave their time very generously. It's also very important that the people we're working with understand that it is not a brochure. This is meant to convey practical experience in all its forms, so a record of success, but also the difficulties that individuals have run up against. And they're meant to end with conclusions and recommendations that are extremely relevant, in this case, for example, to revenue authorities across the continent and further afield. And it is a real tribute to the team from OBR that they understood from the outset that there could be no hiding difficulties under the carpet, and they were remarkably honest with us, for which we are grateful, because the real purpose of these documents is to convey knowledge and practical experience, and if the difficulties that the experts come up against are somehow airbrushed out of a publication, then they have no resonance with other experts elsewhere. Having said all this, what we try and do here is to convey the messages in highly readable form, and I hope that we have managed to do that, in that the documents in the Policy Voices series are meant to be, and I hope all our publications are meant to be legible and comprehensible by anyone. There is a simultaneous launch of the publication going on in Burundi, I'm pleased to say. Pre-press release has gone out in French already. Kieran has recorded an interview to camera, which will also be going out, pre-recorded it. The PDF will be on OBR's website tomorrow. And Domitien and Chantal both recorded an interview at the BBC in Burundi earlier this afternoon. A marvellous opportunity to see the BBC's new building for us all, and a fascinating experience. And then Domitien also spoke to Focus on Africa, and that piece is going out now as we are here, between 6 and 7. And later in the year, a French version of the publication will be produced. We think that's very important, and we hope that it will be widely distributed through among revenue authorities and tax experts in Francophone Africa as well. Now, having fixed on the idea for this event, what we really needed was an acknowledged expert with a broad view across the continent and indeed the world as regards tax matters, and we are extraordinarily grateful to Professor Mick Moore for fulfilling this role of introducing the evening's discussion. Mick is at the Institute of Development Studies, but he is also the founding chief executive of the International Centre for Tax and Development, and I can't think of anyone better qualified to introduce the proceedings and set the scene. Thank you very much, Mick, indeed. And thank you also for contributing to the publication. The centre spread is courtesy of Mick. I'd also like to thank the team at ARI. All our publications are a team effort, and Jonathan, Hannah, Ben have been magnificent, and also, sadly not here tonight, is Piotr, who actually conducted all the interviews in Bujumbura in May and has gone on to a lectureship at Brunel. But it's been a team effort, and thank you very much indeed. Quick word on the format. We're going to have presentations. Mick will introduce the topic, and then Kieran will give an overview about what strategy has been pursued at the OBR since his arrival, what changes have occurred, what progress they've made, and also give us a view on some of the thornier issues that are out there for the future. Domitien and Chantal are kindly going to give 4 or 5 points about their respective areas of expertise, customs in Domitien's case, and domestic taxes in Chantal's, a mix of reflection on what has been achieved and also what needs to be done in the future. Finally, and then after that, we'll open it up for discussion. The presentations won't take more than half an hour, I think, and for those of you who haven't been to an ARI event like this, we highly value the discussion phase, as it were. I'll call time after about an hour for anyone who has to slip away, but then we will carry on for as long as anyone is interested. And I'm well aware that there are enormous range of interests represented in the room tonight, and I'm sure that there will be questions on a very diverse range of issues. The hashtag for this event is #TaxInAfrica for anyone who is tweeting, and our handle, our ID, is @AfricaResearch. And with that, I'll hand over to Mick to introduce. And thank you all again for coming, and thank you all in advance for speaking.
Okay, thank you. Shall I come up there?
Is that all right? And then you're in the light.
Right, thank you. I'm not quite sure how many of you are tax folks and how many of you are Africa folks or something else. But in as far as you know anything about tax, you know that tax can get incredibly complicated. So it is very important to keep it simple, and I partly do that by carrying around with me the whole time something disguised as a pen that just it has my name on one side, and on the other side it says Tax Africa. And that reminds me what really needs to be done. So it does warm my heart to be in a meeting where people are very enthusiastically doing that thing. And we'll perhaps get round to the question later of why Tax Africa. But I don't want to talk about that now. The first thing to say is that certainly if we go back 5-10 years, meetings in London about Africa always used to be full of problems. They are fortunately much less so these days. But in the tax field, Africa actually has a very respectable record, both of maintaining government revenues in most countries, except those that really did fall into major disrepair, but in most countries most of the time, but also a very respectable record of tax reform and of adopting new institutions. So we're not talking here of a very problematic situation. It's on the whole a relatively positive situation. And it's positive perhaps more in Anglophone than in Francophone Africa for various reasons, not totally clear. But fortunately we are here today talking of Francophone Africa, and I think this is one example of very positive reforms spreading more in Francophone Africa. Now, the institution that has been referred to, the Revenue Board of Burundi, is one of a family of what are often called autonomous or semi-autonomous revenue authorities. And these semi-autonomous revenue authorities have been created over the last 20 years in almost every Anglophone country, and now a new Francophone country. There's been a lot of discussion about them. They have many features. But I think the most important thing to understand, and this comes very clearly through in the publication today, is that the creation of a revenue authority and the unification of various tax collectors who were hitherto in separate organisations is not in itself the most important reform. It creates opportunities to do other things. And this comes very clearly in the publication today, that a lot of other things are underway, taking advantage of the unification of the revenue authority. One of the issues that people have discussed a lot about revenue authorities in Africa also comes through in the report in a slightly, I think, a very clear way. You have the combination of two interesting things. You have a government organisation taking some really tough decisions, including decisions to fire a lot of people. And in some cases, and here, a government organisation that's headed by an expatriate. Now, this combination necessarily generates discussion, because many people think, well, is this somehow right that we should have expatriates running key government organisations in Africa and taking all these tough decisions? Well, I think the good news is whether or not it's a good or a bad thing is actually largely a matter of history. This is not the future. Because I think one of the really good pieces of news from Africa these days is not only that nearly all revenue authorities are now run by Africans, but increasingly the great majority of technical assistance from one African country to another, whether it's in IMF or the World Bank or some other organisation, is actually provided by Africans themselves. And that is, in my mind, a very significant change over the last 10, 15 years. And so this whole question of whether or not expatriates should be heading revenue organisations is something we need not worry about. I think, Chantal, you seem to be a good example of this, because I see you've just come back from the World Bank to Burundi. So, now, that change in the personnel, I think, is very positive. I think it also does introduce some interesting questions that have not so far been very much raised. And here's my little plug. I do have a research publication, there are a few copies down there, that does talk about these issues. But one of the issues I raised there is the question of whether it is actually good to have senior people in revenue organisations moving so fast in and out of revenue organisations and a whole lot of other organisations, including the private sector, including the big four professional services firms, etc. Now, whether or not it's a good or a bad thing is not a question I want to answer here. Some of you in Britain may remember that the Public Accounts Committee created quite a stink about these issues in Britain itself not many months ago. So the positive thing is at least Africa is having the same debates about these that we are, and I think that is also very positive. The last thing I want to say by way of introduction is that as someone who researches on tax and sometimes tries to teach tax, but generally convey message about tax to people who are not tax professionals, it is really quite difficult. Tax really is a relatively inaccessible subject. It's technical and it tends to be very dry, and the tax business is mostly occupied by very intense and serious people. There are not many good jokes around tax. What I really like about this publication, and this is a tribute to Chantal Venetian and to everyone involved and to the Institute also, is it's actually a very accessible publication. I mean, it's something I'm going to use for teaching, because I will tell students and other people I talk to, look, if you want to put yourself in the position of a senior tax person and understand what are the issues they face on a day-to-day basis, well, here is a very good start. So congratulations to you for doing that, and I do recommend that you do read through it, because as Edward said, this is not a brochure. I mean, it is actually a very serious story. But let me end on the point of stories, because I hope that the various authors of this publication will not stop here. Because if you search our cultural heritage for themes, stories about tax, you can go through novels and poems and folk tales and rap music and YouTube and anything you care to mention. It is virtually impossible to find anything that's very interesting about taxation. So here is a little start. So I'm hoping that even more will come out of Burundi. There are various stories. There is a rumour that when Kieran retires, he will be writing a book which will be called A Good Tax Man in Africa. So I look forward to that and many other similar publications. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mick. Over to the good tax man in Africa.
It's actually called a Hootsie from Sligo. That's only the working title. Thank you very much, Mick, and thank you, Edward. And I'd like to first of all begin by thanking ARI for this great piece of work. When we came to see them in March this year, I didn't have great expectations, but I really like what we have come up with. It's very, very good, and as Mick was saying, it will get a wide audience around the world. I wanted just to, I won't bore you with a very long presentation, but I just want to talk about pretty much how we built the Revenue Authority in Burundi and what the main issues are there. First of all, why did Burundi want to set up a Revenue Authority? Obviously there was a pressing need for revenue, but also the main driver was the integration into the East African community and the need to harmonise taxation with the other members of the customs union and the open market. And by harmonisation, we meant not just tax rates, but also harmonising the tax base and indeed harmonising the tax administration. So right from the off, Burundi has played an important role in the East African Revenue Authority's forum. and we have all kinds of common procedures and rules for sharing information and so on. The OBR was set up in 2009. I actually worked from Rwanda, where I was working at the time. I worked to help them develop the laws and the basic procedures, codes of conduct, terms and conditions of service, and all of that. At that time, I wasn't expecting to take over the job of Commissioner General of the new Revenue Authority, but as luck and fate would have it, I allowed my name to go forward, and then I actually found I actually wanted the job, so I competed for it and won it. When I arrived in Bujumbura, the Transparency International report had just come out, which had said that the Revenue Authority in Burundi, or the tax office in Burundi, was the most corrupt institution in East Africa, even more corrupt than the Kenyan police, was apparently how it was portrayed. The joke in Burundi was, at last, we're first in everything, first in something, and of course, but I think everybody will agree now that the tax administration is far from being a corrupt institution, and we have brought the organisation along quite a way. So these are the strategy pillars that we've been pursuing, and they're all interlocking and reinforcing and self-supporting. Basically, we had to rewrite the tax laws, so that was a new VAT law, a new income tax law, a new tax procedures law to give common tax procedures across all taxes. We also had to deal with all the human resources and governance issues, get all of those right. So that involved, as I was saying, the code of conduct and the terms and conditions of service and all of the things that you need for a revenue authority, which is, as Mick was saying, a semi-autonomous revenue authority, which means you have the power to sue and be sued and the power to hire and fire, and which is very different from your normal civil service structure. And we had to very much explain to the population what was going on, and that meant developing an outreach program where we were able to go up country and talk to taxpayers and tell them the need for what the OBR was trying to do, what the government meant by setting up a revenue authority. We're basically building a tax system from the ground up. Information technology and the supporting infrastructure are critical, so we had to look at putting in a computer system in customs, a computer system in domestic taxes, a computer system in the back office to automate all of our support functions in human resources, in procurement, and asset management, finance, and so on. And of course, the regional integration agenda was very, very strong, not least because we're financed by Trademark East Africa, and we had to develop common border posts, one-stop border posts, and IT systems for bringing information from the ports all the way along the northern corridor and the central corridor. And this is all done with the intention of maximizing revenue, with creating a taxpayer-centric organisation, and which obviously would promote business and create jobs and fight poverty. So, just to tell you quickly, our first task was to recruit the staff we needed, because we were replacing pretty much old, inefficient, separate tax administrations in the tax office and in the customs office. So we needed 425 positions. We ended up with 9,000 applications. We had to pre-select 2,500 and give them an exam. We marked the exam in the basement of my house under strict secrecy conditions, and we interviewed the top 750 people, and we selected the staff. We also had to recruit international advisors because there just was not enough capacity in the new organisation. So in order to build the capacity quickly, we brought in 7 advisors in income tax and customs, in IT, procurement, and so on. The DFID support, which had been given to the government under an MOU between the government of the UK and the government of Burundi, was passed on through Trademark East Africa. And Trademark East Africa have become our primary funder for our capital expenditure side of things, and they've been very, we are their biggest project, but they've been very good financiers of what we've been trying to do. So again, we recruited the international advisors through open competition, and the assistance for drafting the laws came from the IMF. And another task, although it sounds mundane, was that we broke all the existing internal walls in the tax offices. We moved away from your typical African structure whereby everybody has their own office, and I insisted on it. A lot of my staff didn't believe it until they came in after the weekend that they found the walls had been removed. And we did this for, deliberately to foster work sharing and transparency and openness in the tax administration. So you will see some walls, but because we have some meeting rooms, but there are glass walls, you can see through them. So we're very serious about that. And this will give you, I'm just going to show you some pictures of some of our offices. You can see in that second picture that up there, the furrows are still in the ground where the walls had been removed before we had a time to put tiles over them. And that third picture is is a taxpayer reception area, and as you can see, it's a kind of welcoming taxpayer reception area. The counters are low. There's no glass walls between the taxpayer and the tax official. You just you can pay your taxes in a friendly and convivial atmosphere. And that last picture I'm just showing you there is our new office at the port of Bujumbura. It's rented accommodation, but again, it's all open plan, as that picture shows. And these pictures of the new filing bays, which we introduced to hold the paper files. This green building here is actually a one-stop border post that we erected in a matter of weeks on the border with Tanzania. Again, it's an open plan building, as the inside of it demonstrates. And this last picture is staff housing at the border with Rwanda at Ruba. So it's not the reform was not just about revenue, because we've also been able to deliver services much faster. So we set up a one-stop shop for business registration. You can now register a business in 1 hour in Burundi, which is a dramatic improvement over what was there before. And we also have a one-stop shop with the land registry for land transfers. Those are some pictures of the one-stop shops in action. I mentioned about the laws, and the laws that we needed to harmonise and simplify was 5 major pieces of legislation: a new VAT law, direct tax on income tax, a tax procedures law, and we also needed to look at the mining code and the investment promotion code to remove tax incentives which were in those laws and which were very negative in our view. And just to tell you quickly about the human resources and the governance structure, because as I was saying, the OBR is a revenue board. Our parent ministry is the Ministry of Finance. We have a board of 8 members, including myself, and we have 4 departments within the organisation. We're now up to 600 employees, and next year it'll be 700 employees. And we have, as I say, our advisors and some and human resources advisors, plus temporary staff. On the regional integration side, we had to draft agreements, memoranda of understanding with the neighbouring states, Rwanda and Tanzania, for the operation of the one-stop border posts. And we have set up, as I said, the IT systems to support the regional integration. On the revenue side, this next slide just shows you the revenue collections. So, as I mentioned earlier, just before the OBR was set up, the government was collecting 301 billion in the last year of the old administration, and that's now up to 560 billion this year, and that's how it looks on the graph. So you can see it's quite a good result. So I don't want to bore you with too many more of these slides, but that's just to give you a flavour of the kind of things we did and how we did it and when we did it. And our next challenge going forward now is to draft a second phase of support to the OBR. We're targeting all of the donors who traditionally support Burundi, and what we want to do is get some financing for the years from about the middle of next year until about 2018 to really develop the OBR and to take it forward. So that's in a nutshell. the reform. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Kieran. And we'll pass on to Domitien as well, who is the Deputy Commissioner General. And I don't know how much he'll address it now, but certainly in the questions, I hope some questions will come up about the operation of customs, because it is a fascinating area. And Burundi was trading, if we go back 5 years, there was so little trade between Burundi and the rest of the region, and facilitating this has been a really major operation. But I'm not seeking to steal your speech, but maybe if there isn't a lot on customs, it will come in the questions. Merci beaucoup.
Good evening, everybody. First of all, I want to please you to excuse my English and to be patient with me. I will speak only on customs matter. This morning I asked Edward to print me a copy of a customs declaration. I don't know if he read it or not. Why I asked him to print me this copy, it is for me a very meaningful declaration. It's a declaration from 1969. And with Ernest Armstrong, who was at the moon. As he came back at the ground, he has to make a declaration. And in this declaration, if you have it, I'll let it circulate, you can see what kind of work customs administration is doing. So, in a rapidly changing world, we need a modern and dynamic customs administration. And to achieve this, we have to work on 4 pillars. At OBR, we tried since 2009 or 2010 to work on trade facilitation and security, a fair and efficient revenue collection, the protection of society and institutional and human resources development, summarized in those 4 points. What do we mean, or what have we done in trade facilitation and security? For us, trade facilitation aims to achieve economic competitiveness of our business in Burundi through modernized procedures and formalities, through a use of information and communication technology. Here I can mention that we have brought out the Asikuda award system, and we have an interconnectivity of all borders where goods enter and go out through to Burundi. I can mention also transparency in our work. It is very, very important, transparency and integrity. To facilitate trade, the Commissioner General has mentioned that we build one-stop border ports. We have now 3 operating one-stop border ports, one at the border with Tanzania in the north, east from Burundi, one with Rwanda in northeast with Rwanda, and one in the west north with Rwanda and Burundi, and we aim to build another one in the north between Rwanda and Burundi. It is very important this one-stop border post facilitates operations at the border so that business people can make a good business in real time. We have also developed procedures, and when I mention procedures, that means to translate laws in an understandable language for business people. And here you can, I can say our business people, many of our business people have never been at the school. They can maybe read, but they can not understand juridical language. That is very important to make it easier, to make simplified procedures for them. It is also important that we mention that we are now integrated in the regional, in the East African community, and we use the same Customs Management Act in all the 5 countries. So we discuss with the other customs administration what way we can go in order to facilitate trade. The second point is to be fair and efficient in revenue collection. And that is in alliance with the facilitation and procedures. We mean customs must facilitate the compliant trade sector in the current economic climate. This requires the consistent and the transparent application of customs procedures. That is what we try to do at the moment. And a proactive approach by customs to promote and facilitate simplification of those procedures through initiatives such as Authorized Economic Operator. We have begun also to make this program effective, so that we have chosen some operators we think they are very serious and we can facilitate them to go through customs without so many operations. It is also important to understand the customs evaluations, the rules of origin, compliance and enforcement. In all those domains, we try to do our best. To all those points, I refer to the revised Kyoto Protocol, which is also a binding document for customs in Burundi. The third point is the protection of the society. The protection of the society, I mean the way how to manage the risk, how to manage the risk. And if I speak from risk, I mean the risk, the revenue risks, which kind of risk we run if we lose revenue. Or this can happen, for example, in undervaluation, in misuse of origin and preferential duties, in misclassification, and so on. That is a language for customs agents. I mean, it is not very important. I mean also the security risks. In the globalized world, with terrorism, with other kinds of misuse and so, we have to be very, very careful. Also, I mean here environment risks related to the illicit cross-border trafficking of hazardous and toxic waste, trafficking with endangered species. Sorry. And I think we have to be carefully in this area. But I can mention in these 2 areas, security risks and environment risks, we have to be very effective. At the moment, I can say we are not so far. We are implementing tools to do a good risk management which take into account all these levels of risk. From the beginning of next year, customs will be equipped with cargo scanners and electronic cargo tracking so that we can really say we know what is in those containers, or some containers do not disappear when they are on the way to Bujumbura, for example. And the last point is the institutional and human resources development, where we have done a lot of things, a lot of capacity building since 2010. But I can mention that we need more trainings for our staff so that they can deal the complexity which is based to the complexity of business in the globalized world of today. I mean, that is enough for today. And as I answer your question, thank you.
Thank you, Domitien, very much indeed. Chantal, just to remind you, is the Commissioner for Domestic Customs, for Domestic Revenues and Non-Fiscal Revenues.
Thank you, Edward. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for coming to the event. I will try to summarize what is the domestic tax in Burundi, because it is large matter. Since the creation of OBR, many things have been changed in domestic tax. The CG has already said about the new laws. We have improved the laws, the income tax law, the VAT law, and tax procedures. And we focus our changes on the best practice, which is made in other countries, especially in East African community. And we especially focus on not to increase, but to reduce the rate of income tax. And we focus also on some definition, like what is non-resident and resident. That was not clarified in the oldest law. And also, we focus our changes on simplified for giving the opportunity of taxpayers to comply more. We simplified all the laws. And secondly, we put in place a system of gathering all non-direct fiscal revenue, which before OBR was levied by different ministers, departments and ministers, and so maybe some of them were not in the national budget. Now we are in charge of levy all the non-fiscal revenue. We also, following the IMF reports, especially the recommendation of IMF report, we have made a new segmentation of the taxpayers in 3 categories. We have now large taxpayers, which are all those who are over 1 billion of turnover, and we have the medium taxpayers under 1 billion of turnover to 100 million, and those are notable. They have to pay VAT. And we have also small and micro taxpayers, which are under 100 million. The main point of that is that because we want to develop a private strategy for each category, because we can't tax the large taxpayer as we tax the small and micro taxpayers. Each of them has their issues, which can be more
appropriate.
Appropriate, yes. Also, I can say that in order to have a common understanding of taxation of SMEs, especially for SMEs, we have set up a mixed committee with Ministry of Interior, because they have also to levy some taxes in commune, and sometimes there are many confusion between tax levied by commune and tax levied by OBR, and now we have a mixed committee which can explain more to the taxpayers what's due to the OBR and what's due to the commune. And we have We are aware that the SMEs are not always comfortable with the laws, that we have a tax communication program. It is a big program funded by USAID, and we intend to make education of taxpayers, especially those small who are not aware of the laws. And we will also translate our laws in Kirundi, funded by African Development Bank. And we have also for them fixed rate for fair tax system to facilitate them to be to comply with their obligation. Ober work closely, as said by CG, with the committee. There is a technical committee group which is under the second vice president of the Republic, and that committee was in charge of reforming some laws and some procedures. And I can say that the Burundi is now in the 10 top of reformers in the world, and the most important, the most reformers in the world. And we have especially worked on the creation of companies, paying tax indicator, and transfer property. We have also some challenges. I can't say that we have all best things, but we have also some challenges. There are challenges which confronting OBR. I can name with training of staff, because we have within OBR old and new staff, and we have to train them, especially in specialized audits like IT, telecom companies, transfer pricing, and exchange of information. We need to train them on how to exchange information between ESC countries to be more efficient. And we also need an IT system of domestic tax, because the one who was used before is not performing, and now we need another one. And we have also some areas which are not explored. I can name the mining sector, but luckily we have now a new mining code already voted previous week, sorry, by the Parliament, and we are committed to put in place a system of collecting all information on oil minerals exported. The huge problem we have is in informal sector, but it is a big informal sector, but in the last year we have made a census, and we found only in Bujumbura town we found about 7,000 of informal sector, and now we are this year we are trying to register them, and we have the target of register 400 each month, and I think we have realized that target. And also we are committed to go in the market where we will be. We will put an office in the market for register all the taxpayers, and we are the support of the government, which has told to the taxpayers in the market that we have to have a NIF. A NIF is the number of identification for all taxpayers. And we start also with the North, where we want to make some campaign of registers the taxpayers in the North. I think maybe I will wait your question, because tax issues is very huge. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chantal. Thank you for all the presentations, which I hope have given rich stimulus for questions and or comments. So, if I could now open up the discussion to the floor. Do please make observations as well as ask questions, but if I could ask you to keep them brief, that would be very much appreciated, so that everyone can have a chance to get involved. I think we won't pass the microphone around, or that somebody might get electrocuted. But it might be me first. Yeah. So we'll try and do the question and answer without microphone, please. Is that all right? Is that all right from sound? Marvellous. Could I have a first contribution or question? Andrew, if you could say where you're from, that would be very helpful for the panel as well.
My name's Andrew McCoubrey, I'm from Diffid. Thank you very much for a very stimulating talk, and indeed congratulations on your very real success. You said at the beginning that tax is quite a dry subject, but it also can be very political. And I wondered if you'd care to comment on some of the political challenges you face and how you deal with them.
Kieran.
Yeah, I thought it would be me. Yeah, in fact, the politics. Will I use this, or can you hear me?
You hear all right?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, the politics of managing a revenue authority is probably takes up 80% of my time. It's what's really important in these situations is to have a political champion for the revenue administration. I have great support from the President, from His Excellency the President, but also from the first and second Vice Presidents. And both of them have been instrumental in helping us explain the need for the revenue authority to the population and to the stakeholders, and have been instrumental in helping us get the required support that we need. So, in fact, you cannot do this job without strong political support from the top. It was the same in Rwanda. I could even show you pictures. There's President Kagame listening very intently to what I have to say. I don't even have a drink in my hand. This is Yeremia Tabai in Kiribati, and then this one here is President Nkurunziza. So political support is essential to everything that we do in the tax administration. Not all members of the government and not all members of the private sector are uniformly in line with the need for the revenue administration, and it's critical that the politicians and the senior politicians support the revenue administration and force perhaps the less willing ones into a situation of support, or at least acquiescence to what we're doing. And of course, we've had our problems. We've had situations in Burundi where certain elements of the government were certainly antagonistic to what we were doing. But by and large, it's a very thin line. You have to walk it, and you have to win it.
And if I could just say on the way through to domestic, there's this interesting situation as well where policy is set by the Ministry of Finance. The OBR is the practitioner, but and this is a highly political situation to manage, isn't it? Yes. And Domitian. In answer to this.
I think I can say, in general, we have the support of the top political people, but we still have some resistance from some ministers who maybe need more time to understand our work. And that is it is normal, understandable. But for us, it is very important that we feel that we have the support we need.
And at the back.
Paul Adams, I'm a writer and researcher on Africa. It's really following on from the previous question, as well as resistance from politicians. I'm sure you have resistance from the public as well when it comes to raising more revenue, and that certainly you would have in this country. And if I would imagine that what the public want to know is, if we're going to pay more tax, what is the government going to do with it? And has the government explained, I know this is not the job of the OBR, but do you think the government has adequately explained how it's going to spend the revenue collected?
I think we have to make a linkage between revenue collection and on the other side how the budget is used in Burundi or in other countries. And at the moment, I think the government try also to use internal resources to fund some development projects, some such as building of hospitals or roads and schools and so on. But we need more communication on those achievements so that everybody can know, okay, I paid my taxes and in return I become maybe facilities in my life and so on. I think we need to work together with the Ministry of Finance so that we can show we brought money in the treasure and this money has served to build this and so on.
Mick, can I ask if you would like to say
Sure.
something about this business
well,
of taxpaying is unpopular all around the world.
Sure.
How does one get the public to think they want to pay?
Well, I mean, it's certainly true that in principle it's not the job of the revenue authority, it's the job of the government to explain what's happening with the money. But in reality, in some African countries, in fact, revenue authorities are better at trying to explain than are the ministries of finance. I mean, Uganda is an example where the revenue authority has a little cell that's dedicated to trying to do this thing. And that's, I think, because, as Kieran said earlier, they have some autonomy, a bit of independence, and maybe a rather different perspective than many other parts of government. I mean, the other side to this is the question of whether government should explicitly earmark increased revenues against particular expenditures, which is terribly controversial because this is anathema to standard public finance people. I think this should never happen. Because if you do a lot of this, you find you've tied up your budget in advance and you have less and less scope to make decisions. But actually my view is that done on a modest scale for a limited period of time, explicitly connecting additional revenues to certain types of expenditure is a sensible thing. And in Ghana for, I think, about 20 years now, there has been an understanding that improved revenues do go, I think, mostly to health. Now, whether in practice there is a very tight linkage, whether all the additional money that's said to go to health will go to health, I'm not entirely sure. But it's certainly not a bad PR exercise to say that, and I think it would not do any harm for more African governments to do that, provided they said this is for 5-10 years maximum, we're not going to tie our hands in the long run.
So maybe I can add something. Why the revenue authority must be involved in the process of explanation to which goals the money is used. As a revenue authority, we are the ones who are with people who ask for money, and sometimes they want to know why they are paying. And we can't wait that someone from the government or from the Ministry of Finance come and explain. You have to give an answer. If the public wants ask questions about how we use the money, we have to give an answer. That is why I said we have to work closely with the Ministry of Finance so that we can be provided with those answers we can give if we are asked to give an answer.
Chantal?
Yes. It is true that maybe population taxpayers are not they not see the tax as we want them to see it. But we are we work now closely with the Chamber of Commerce, and we make some joint meeting. We go together to see the population, and we go to with them to explain what is the law, and to explain them that they have to pay tax. The Chamber of Commerce is our partner in that matter.
Just to mention that one of the things we did right from the off was we decided to publish our revenue collection figures each month, and we've never missed a month since I've been there doing that. We publish precisely what we collect, and we let all stakeholders in the population know that these are the funds which we've collected and which have gone directly to the government through the system. And I don't know if any other revenue authority, well, maybe they are doing it, but we certainly did it right from the off, and it's been very positive. We do a press release in French and English every month on our revenue collection figures.
And the next, at the back, welcome.
Hi, my name's Jack Checkback, and I'm ex-ARI, and I was in Burundi doing the interviews, so lovely to see you.
You were thanked before you arrived.
My question is, if OBR feels lonely, and if so, what implication there is of that loneliness? And what I mean by this, it is acknowledged widely from my experience in Burundi and outside that it's an outstanding institution because of its focus on customer service, because of very when it stands on corruption and so on. But it's an institution within many others, and from my understanding, not all of them, in fact, the majority of them have not caught up and are not to the same standard. And I wondered if that poses problems, and if so, how you address them.
Yeah, we do feel lonely, yes. And, you know, we're very much aware of the fact, and we do try and make sure that we actually don't run too fast, because we can leave people behind. And we discovered this, it became very obvious when we were moving to that new building I showed you on the slides, and we wanted to co-locate with the Investment Promotion Agency and others, and they didn't want to hear about it. They didn't want to come and work with the OBR. They didn't want to come and work in open plan offices. They didn't want to work with our rigorous way of working, which was kind of a big disappointment actually to us, well, to me especially. But you know, so we're very much aware of that, and we keep on trying to push our position with the government and with the second vice president and others. It's a fact of life that other institutions have not caught up, and but we think we still feel that we're a catalyst for change going on in Burundi. We're working closely, you know, on the border posts with the police, with the immigration, with the Bureau of Standards, and so on. And I think eventually that they will catch up.
Mick, could I ask how this has played out elsewhere as well? I mean, one key issue is salaries. I mean, people are paid a lot more at the OBR than they would be as civil servants. They can, of course, be fired, which is harder to do if they're civil servants. But could you give us a perspective from other countries?
I mean, you're right, Edward. I mean, the salaries issue is always the nub of the issue. You know, why should we, any other government agency, cooperate with you, the revenue agency, because you guys are paid so much more than we're paid. And that particularly happens with organisations in the Ministry of Finance, because very often you're in a situation where the tax collectors were in the Ministry of Finance a few years ago, and they were our colleagues. Now they've either been sacked or they're working for the Revenue Authority, and they're getting several times the salaries of the people left behind. So, it's been an issue actually virtually worldwide. Wherever you've established an autonomous revenue authority, this issue has come up, and there have been occasions it's led to major conflict. Some years ago in the Ukraine, the Finance Ministry and the Revenue Authority weren't even talking to each other because they got into such conflict about these things. And it has meant that in some other countries, the differential salaries for the Revenue Authority have sometimes actually been brought down because of political pressure over the years, because of these kind of concerns. But sometimes they've gone up again. So you've got quite a diversity actually, and I don't think there is a real equilibrium. But on the whole, I think, over a period of 10 or more years, countries, they move a bit towards some kind of equilibrium. Salaries tend to equalise a little bit, and they do find ways of working with other government organisations. Not an impossible problem.
And how about with an institution acting as an exemplar? I mean, does it rub off in your experience elsewhere?
Well, I mean, it's really Kieran's experience is by far the best example of this is actually Rwanda next door. And it's probably the only really good example at present, but that's not so much rubbing off, it's a matter of deliberate policy. I mean, the government of Rwanda very deliberately took good people from the Revenue Authority and posted them in a whole lot of other quite senior positions worldwide. I mean, 2 ministers of finance, I think, from...
Yeah, three in fact.
3 ministers of finance, but a whole lot of other very senior people. But it doesn't necessarily, I think otherwise, if you don't have that policy, it doesn't necessarily rub off, and partly for the reason I gave earlier. Because highly qualified people working for revenue authorities are also very attractive for Price Waterhouse and Deloitte's and very large transnational banks and the IMF and the World Bank, etc. So, sometimes the benefit of all that capacity building, I mean, it may go to the country, but it certainly may not stop in the public sector.
Would you like to comment on this, the loneliness?
No.
No. Sometimes. The lady through here, please.
Hi, my name is Clelia and I'm studying in the UK. I'm a Burundian national. I have a question about the OVR strategy pillars. You mentioned something about fight against poverty. So I would like to know if you have any examples or you could elaborate a little bit about that. And also, were the selection of staff based on gender, ethnic, or religious, or academic background, any sort of?
When we went to select staff, we were given an almost impossible task because we had to reach ethnic quotas, we had to reach regional quotas, and we had to reach gender quotas. We ended up with 40% female. We ended up with every region in the OVR being, every region in Burundi having staff in the OVR. And we ended up with 52% Tutsi, 48% Hutu. So that's how it ended up, and it's pretty much, our recruitment policy. Obviously, we don't want to go for quotas. We obviously want to select people on the basis of their abilities, but at the same time, we have to respect the ethnic differences and the gender situation, and that's what we've tried to do. I think we've done not too bad actually, given that. On the fight against poverty, our attitude on this is that. I know it sounds counterintuitive that if you're taking tax revenue from people, are you making them poorer? But the reality of it is that Burundi doesn't have any other option. The amount of revenue that can come into the state from taxes is far greater than international development assistance or even immigrants' remittances or whatever you want to think about. So if Burundi is going to be able to pay for its public service and to invest in infrastructure, it has to have the revenues. And if it doesn't have the revenues, then it can't invest in the infrastructure, and therefore it can't create the conditions for which investors will be happy to come in and invest in the country and create jobs. That's the way we look at it.
Just sorry, but it's more like a statement or something. Because it was mentioned that, I don't know, but like as a Burundi national, I haven't seen really how the revenues have been used in education or health, or I don't know, like I don't really, it's not obvious from a local perspective.
Dimitri, would you like to comment?
I can give an example. That was the first time, I think 2011, the government of Burundi began to use revenues collected by OBR to build an hospital in Karuzi. That is the first hospital built with Burundi money. And I think they are building many schools, and health centers with the help of this money collected by OBR. There are many schools. Can give you hundreds of examples. And we are building a dam. That is the first one which is built with the money collected through revenue, OBR, and so on. There are many examples, but I can point out that this money we collect is not enough to make so many development projects. We still need money from outside, but our aim is to reach a situation where we can collect so much money so Burundi can use without so much help from outside. So
it's a very interesting point you raise there, because you're declaring as a Burundian you're not aware of this, and so this raises the whole issue of communication, which everybody is well aware of. And Chantal, would you like to speak about communication?
Yes, about the budget, which is in the agriculture sector. Now the government put 10% of the budget in the agriculture sector, and the next year it will be about 12%. Is that to show you that the government is committed to improve the agriculture sector?
Which is livelihood for 90% of the population,
yes,
approximately. Yeah. Karen, would you like to? You're all right. Is that okay? And the gentleman, sorry, and I'll come to you. Just in front first.
It's me.
Yes, please.
Rory Meakin, Taxpayers Alliance. Thank you for 4 very interesting talks. Over 200 years ago, the great moral philosopher Adam Smith said that there are only 3 requirements for prosperity: peace, easy taxes, and tolerable administration of justice. And Burundi's results, economic results over the last few years, have shown that Burundi has certainly gone some way to meeting those goals. And the simplification of taxes and cutting the income tax rates both go. It's not just about tax rates, it's also about simplicity and about administration, as you've explained. That part of that, easy taxes, and also administration of justice point. So it's very heartening to hear all this. My question is, Kieran was talking earlier about resistance. In fact, I think more of you have said there's resistance among some people to the idea of I think it's a separate tax revenue collection authority from the main civil service. I'm curious, what are the grounds for, other than just being different from the status quo, what are the grounds for opposition to that structure?
Well, that's a difficult one to answer. You would think that, given the revenue results I showed, that everybody would be very happy with the revenue authority, but some business people were very, very entrenched in the old ways of doing business by paying corruption and bribes and so on. And for them, it was a big shock to have all of that removed, and almost overnight, and then to find that they have to pay their taxes like everybody else and comply with the law like everybody else. And so there was a lot of efforts to undermine the revenue authority from certain sectors like that. So maybe I'll just stop there. But certainly, not everybody. It was not in everybody's interest that the revenue authority do its job openly, transparently, and without fear or favour.
So I think everybody can understand that 30 years you developed a praxis. You do not need to pay tax. taxes, or you pay less than you have to pay. And there is an administration who came and asked you to pay more. This is a change management. You have to, that is understandable that some people resist. And that is our job, to explain them that things has been changed, and also to put in place clear procedures. That is very important. Procedures. Before OBR, I asked me if there were procedures how to collect revenue. I don't know. Maybe Chantal can correct me. But I think it is understandable that people at the beginning resist. But I think after 5 years, 10 years, there will be no resistance.
Sorry, it's purely about the beneficiaries of corruption, if you like,
yes,
who are paying less under that system, the cumulative bribes and the taxes that they did pay, less than taxes now. There's no, there are no moral or technical or any other political kind of objections to it. It's purely naked self-interest on that part. So I'm expecting so, but I just wondered if there was any broader kind of argument against that, because it would seem to be quite, I'm very glad our HMRC is not the same organisation as HM Treasury in this country, and I can perfectly see the logic for having two separate administration.
But yeah, I would say Nicholas.
Sorry.
No, go on.
So can we?
Yes, thank you.
Right.
I'm Robert Home from Anglia Ruskin University. A couple of questions, one quite narrow actually, and the other one much broader. The narrow one is about tax on immovable property. And you've mentioned property transactions being recorded and so on. And usually these kind of taxes, rates and so forth, are handled at the local level. I'm just curious to be informed as to how that aspect works, because it is of course one way of reaching the informal sector through some kind of market fees. So that's the narrow one. The broader one is back to the corruption issue, and that often there may be some code of conduct for those in public office, or some charter, and presumably you have such in your organisation, and the government has presumably something similar on their side. And I'm curious as to how that operates, if it exists, particularly bearing in mind that you can have a clean sweep and hire a load of new people, and then the old practices start to creep back in.
Could I just interject, because before the answers, just to say, we've reached an hour, and I know that some people will have to slip away. And before you do, I would just like to convey all of our thanks very much to the speakers for fascinating presentations and being able to give us a real sense of perspective as to what has been achieved and some of the challenges that lie ahead in terms of tax administration in Burundi and elsewhere in the world. So thank you very much indeed. And thank you to all of you for coming as well. And we will carry on as long as there are questions and as long as everyone can keep going up on the panel. Sorry to have interrupted midway, but I thought one or two people looked like they had to slip off. Kieran. Chantal first.
Yes,
Thank you.
What I can say on tax on transfer property, we work together with there is one-stop shop on property transfer, and there is the staff of the Minister of Finance, Cadastre, who make the audit about the property, but within the OBR we have also auditors who see, who review what has been made by the Minister of Justice. And sometimes we find that the calculation was not true, and we can make some correction. But I think for that time there is no one who can make a transfer of property without pass through OBR, because all those who want to sell their property, they have to have a NIF. It is an obligation to have a NIF, and we know everybody who wants to sell property.
Yeah, I can come back and talk more about property, but just on the code of conduct, I think the OBR is the only organisation in Burundi with a written code of conduct. We developed one right from the start for the organisation. We have very strict disciplinary procedures within the OBR, and we do dismiss people for infringements on the code of conduct if it amounts to gross misconduct. This year, so far, we've sacked 8 people. We've sacked, I think it was 12 in 2011, and so on. So we're regularly dismissing people or giving them less serious sanctions for breaches of the code of conduct. But as far as I'm aware, no other organisation has a code of conduct in Burundi.
Mick, how about codes of conduct elsewhere and the efficacy in tackling corruption that has become institutionalised?
I probably don't know enough about that to add. Could I say something on the property tax?
Certainly, please.
Because I think it's clear to most people who specialise in tax, especially internationally, that taxes on property, whether they're on transfers or whether they're on the occupation of property, are probably one of the least exploited taxes worldwide. And they're one of the best taxes worldwide. And they're the best taxes because they are less distorting than virtually any other tax, and they're quite difficult to evade, and they do tend to be relatively fair in the sense that they do fall on wealthier people rather than poorer people. I don't know the situation exactly in Burundi, but there is barely a country in the world that actually uses property taxes to the extent that they should, including this one in particular. So it's a very important issue. It's still a bit of a mystery to me as to why property taxes are so underused worldwide.
Yeah.
Political
factors. There's one interesting, just add on to what Mika said, in both Burundi and Rwanda, these are the only countries where I've seen this. The income tax on rental income is not collected by the Revenue Authority, it's collected by the local administration. And I don't know who copied from whom, but those two countries have that. And of course, that can suit elites very much, because elites are generally multiple property owners, usually residential properties, which are rented out for large US dollar payments into foreign bank accounts. And it's something that we have on our to-do list in terms of how to bring that back to central taxation, while at the same time creating an alternative source of revenue for the local administration, for the local authorities. And obviously, a property tax would be ideal for that result. So that's something that we're looking at.
Would you like to? Any more? Can I just go on this side? Sorry, just in the interests of fairness, and then I'll come back. Yes.
Hi, Jonathan Barlow. I work at Africa Research Institute. The issue of exemptions, I think, is an interesting issue. I just would be interested to hear from the panel what they think are the most damaging types of exemptions that a country like Burundi experiences, and some of the strategies that you undertake or that you should undertake to try to minimise these for the benefit of the country.
Yeah, exemptions are not a homogeneous definition. There's many different types of exemptions. You have like VAT exemptions for privileged persons, like embassies and so on, which you cannot do anything about because they are governed by the by conventions. You've also got exemptions on assistance, international development assistance, say through the European Union or through the World Bank, where there are memoranda of understanding between the government and the donor that taxation will not impinge on these. And then you've got the most damaging type, which are discretionary ones, which are discretionary exemptions, which are either given by the Investment Promotion Agency in an attempt to induce investors into the country, or they're given by either a presidential or a ministerial order. And those are the ones that we've been tackling, because those are the ones we think are very poor value for the state. And we have worked very closely with the Investment Promotion Agency to actually stop them from giving away exemptions unnecessarily or needlessly. And we've had quite a lot of success in doing that. The total value of exemptions is still very high. It's over 100 billion, which out of on a tax take of almost 600 billion is a huge amount. So, but we are slowly getting. You cannot turn the ship around overnight. So we are getting these slowly whittled away, and we have had success in getting the Minister of Finance to write to all the other ministries and say that that these ministries are henceforth barred from signing contracts which give tax exemptions.
I know you'd like to ask a question, but also you're nodding about the exemptions. Would you like to make a point about the exemptions as well?
Well, I'll ask my question actually. Sort of
is it related to? Or?
Yeah, I think so. But I'm sure the panel can also expand the answer. I'm Jeremy Cape. I'm a tax partner at the international law firm Dentons, and I have a particular interest in acting for a variety of African governments, investors going into Africa. Sometimes they're African, sometimes they're African. And my question relates to double tax treaties. Now, in Africa, you have one extreme, countries like Mauritius and South Africa that have entered into a large number of double tax treaties. Then in the middle, you have Nigeria, Tanzania, Egypt that have a number. And then at the other extreme, those like Burundi or Guinea that have a handful if they have any at all. So I was interested in the views of the panels on, in relation to Burundi, but African jurisdictions more generally, their views on entering into double tax treaties, and the role of the revenue authority in each jurisdiction in that process of deciding whether to enter into a treaty, and if so, what's going to be contained within it, on the basis that one, you're going to have to do the administration of it, and two, get the treaty wrong, and you can see those revenues falling, get it right, and see those revenues rising.
Yeah. It is a minefield, and I'm coming increasingly to the idea that Burundi has no negotiated double taxation agreements, as you know, and perhaps we should actually stay away from them. Is how I'm thinking at the moment. I'll tell you why. When we drafted the new tax laws, the income tax law, we put a lot of the provisions that you would normally find in a treaty inside the law. So the definition of a permanent establishment, the definition of the territorial territory, and the source rules for the taxation are all in the tax law. So we don't need too much. It does cut away the need for a treaty. And as you say, these treaties are difficult to negotiate, and they're difficult also to maintain, and there's a big capacity issue around maintaining them. What I am very much in favour of is TIEAs, which is information exchange agreements, because they're something you can negotiate very quickly over the internet almost with countries, and they give you the benefit of the information exchange between Burundi and the country that we may be interested in exchanging the information. And we don't have to worry about negotiating or giving away rates on dividends, interest, royalties, management fees, and anything like that. So that's the thinking that we're kind of pursuing at the moment. Both Belgium and the Netherlands are interested in negotiating a double taxation agreement with us, but I think we will probably just say to them, let's go for an information exchange agreement first, and we see how we go with that.
Could I just take one step back on to exemptions? Mick, would you like to?
Yeah, and once again, not explicitly Burundi, although the paper did say quite a lot about Burundi. I mean, I wanted to make 2 or 3 other points, because along with property taxes, exemptions are, the big problem globally in almost every country. I suppose, three things. There are still countries in the world where there are no clear criteria for giving tax exemptions to investors, and often multiple agencies that are able to give exemptions. I sense that is the case actually in Burundi from the report, so a big problem. Secondly, the economic research on this seems to be virtually unanimous, and there's very little dissent. Exemptions are certainly one way of attracting foreign investment, but they're not the only way of attracting foreign investment, and they certainly often do not rank very highly, because there's a clear trade-off. I mean, if you're giving so many exemptions, you don't have enough revenue to fix your roads and your electricity and your ports and all the other things. Well, you have a worse investment climate than if you didn't have exemptions. So exemptions should be seen as an investment climate issue, not stand alone. And I think there's no doubt that exemptions are grossly over-handed out worldwide, far too many of them. But people have been saying that for the last 20 years, and it doesn't seem to change it very much. I think part of the problem, only a small part of the problem, is that no international organisation so far will really, pin its colours to the masthead and try to get international agreement over tax exemptions. The OECD is trying to do this at present. There is a document floating around which is draft agreement on tax exemptions, but no one wants to take it up. Once again, it's for their political issues.
I want to add, with exemptions, at the moment Burundi is a part of the East African community. On this matter of exemptions is a matter of discussion on the level of the community. But I think maybe the Professor Mike can help us with the studies which have been made on exemptions. If there is advantages, economic advantages to grant exemptions or if it is better not to grant exemptions and to collect revenue, but there will be, if this revenue will be enough to fund some projects and so on, maybe a scientific study is welcome to give us the way to understand if it is better to grant or not.
Anything to add on Chantal?
Yes,
Sorry,
I
I'm sorry.
that the government is thinking of changing the investment code. Maybe in the next year we have another investment code regarding which sector of activity which is best for Burundi.
This gentleman, yes, please.
Yeah, hi, my name's Martin Grayson. I'm at the LSE, the Research International Tax in Developing Countries. When the question was asked about you feeling lonely, I guess I was wondering whether your friends in other revenue authorities in African countries are a way for you to feel less lonely. I know that you're a member of ATAF, for example, and I was wondering if you could talk a bit about what you gain and what you would like to gain more from those kind of initiatives. And I guess also I was interested in your role, Kieran, as a European expat in that kind of environment where presumably you're slightly on a limb compared to most of the commissioners generally who are, as Mick said, African.
Yeah, well, we're not only on the international side. We have, as you say, we work very closely with the, Burundi is a member of the East African Revenue Authorities. We meet at the Commissioner General level. We meet every 6 months, and we discuss a lot of areas of common interest. We also have our technical committees from the OBR, and all the revenue agencies who meet much more frequently, several times in a 6-month period, to exchange information on best practices in tax administration. So, and I encourage all of my staff to have email contact with their counterparts in all the other 4 revenue authorities in East Africa and beyond, and they do that. And ATAF is a very good organisation actually. It's very good for disseminating knowledge, best practices for people to meet and discuss common issues. We had a very, very interesting meeting in South Africa earlier this year on which was the first time that ATAP had brought together both the boards and the commissioners general of many tax administrations to talk about the governance issues in how you run a revenue authority, and that was a really worthwhile initiative. So we on the international level, we're not lonely at all, oddly enough.
And I hope our publication, will help with that as well. It'll be distributed through ATAF and through CATAF, the Commonwealth Association of Tax Administrators, and other bodies. And I hope it will encourage debate but also share.